For many my age, the Final Fantasy series is synonymous with the golden years of gaming. But while FF7 and 9 have both captured the hearts of countless players in the West, Final Fantasy VIII is somewhat more divisive. And that's a shame. Here's a video on why I think it's underrated. Final Fantasy VIII was a risky attempt at reinvention for a series already known for it. The game utilized an aesthetic, mechanics, and subject matter that didn't quite conform to predefined notions. Ditching the chibi anime look of its predecessor, 8 struck a pseudo-realistic pose, while aiming for an elegance it never fully got credit for. Looking like a mix between the Fifth Element and the Phantom Menace, while playing like a hardcore yet unconventional, even iconoclastic JRPG, FF8 resembled nothing else, and that much seems certain. What made the game less popular may have been everything about it that took risks. The game plot weaves a mind-bending tale of time compression and tells a love story that surpasses the boundaries of space-time that seems in retrospect way ahead of its time, in terms of its narrative complexity. FF8 uses the format of video games to tell a story with a structure that arguably had never been attempted before. With story elements involving industrial-scale private armies, destiny, new crusades, time travel, space travel, loneliness, depression, and mental illness, FF8 swung for the fences, yet for many players failed to connect. Next to the cyberpunk anime of 7 and the medieval daydream that is 9, 8 can look drab and dour. And its pouty, grouch protagonist, Squall, may have struck too close to home for angsty teens playing the game for them to find him likable. But that's just what made 8 so great, its emotional depth and honesty. While 7 and 9 featured broad characters and archetypes, those in 8 have more inside them than meets the eye. Squall's story is touching because of its frailty and his dependence on others for love. That may not make him a swashbuckler like 9's Zidane, or a tough anti-hero like Cloud in 7, but it does make him, in the long run, more intimate, more honest to the human condition. Yet Squall could have been the most beloved character in the entire series, and there'd still be a large contingent who disliked the game purely on the grounds of its fundamental features: junctioning, drawing, and GF summoning. Every Final Fantasy reinvents itself, like I said, but FF8 attempted to reimagine the RPG as a genre by taking away one of its oldest standard features, permanent possession of magical spells. Instead of learning a spell, you either spend it, save it, or withdraw it from an enemy. But you want to think carefully about this, given that each summon or guardian force you equip a character with unlocks the ability to quote-unquote junction one of those spells, almost like a stat-boosting piece of equipment. Use them all up, and you not only lose the spell in question, but the stat boost that it provided. While incredibly engaging and in-depth in the long run, in the short term, this junctioning system can truly be a pain in the ass to figure out. On top of junctioning, as if it wasn't complicated enough, GFs level up and gain permanent abilities of their own, which will benefit any party member who equips them, provided you remember to set it up correctly. Over time, this opens up not only in-battle special abilities like Mug or transform the enemy into a card, but main menu-only abilities also, like magic refinement and item conversion. It's a lot to keep track of, especially when the stats that you can boost with certain magic over time not only can affect your general stats, but also things like your resistance to certain magic, and even add a bit of magical damage to a character's attacks. Yeah, it's a lot to keep track of, and so, for that matter, is the story, which periodically takes you not only back in time, but inside of an entirely different three-man party. Compounding this confusion, there are roles that change identities, like Sorceress and Knight. and heroes who become villains as well as the other way around. Considering that, to top it all off, 8 has more missable summon items, dialogue scenes, items, and minigames than maybe any other Final Fantasy of its era, it's easy to get why it wasn't really working for lots of those who bought it expecting another Final Fantasy VII. The art style, objects, and environmental design are all pretty risky too. FF8 strikes the strangest possible balance between realism and fantasy, practical and fantastical. But all this is exactly why I love it. It's a seriously deep game that pulls no punches, and tosses the player headfirst into its hypnotic, surreally melodramatic world. FF8 may be even more sci-fi than 7, with much more full realization of its fantasy societies, history, and overall world. Final Fantasy VIII also made a major step forward for the series towards pseudo-realism, though a gap did still exist between how Squall looked in cutscenes versus gameplay. Unlike in FF7, no such gap existed between exploration and combat character models. Furthermore, whenever not on the world map, you could see all of your party members on screen. A sequence plays out in space that really experiments with things like visual depth and perspective. FF8 did a lot to move the series out from its origins in 2D, arguably no less than the follow-up game that was being created at the same time, FF9, which used stunning 2.5D miniaturized stage sets. Another really underrated component to FF8 had to do with its central conceit of belonging to the merc outfit Seed. The game secretly keeps score of everything you do. You graduate at a given rank. This rank, in turn, determines Squall's salary, which you receive every so often automatically. And for the rest of the game, taking exams on the game's mechanics can get you a promotion, while performing certain events poorly can cause your rank to decrease. Meanwhile, every major plot point in the game plays out like the exam mission, with a briefing followed by its execution. This seemed to build on the early parts of FF7 when you worked for Avalanche. The sense of climbing the ranks of your organization by taking on bigger and bigger assignments was exceptionally forward-thinking of FF8, while providing a great sense of progression. There was also a much more engaging limit break system, which integrated formerly unrelated or non-existent aspects of gameplay like scavenger hunting and weapon mods. To get the strongest limit breaks, you'd have to seek out the relevant magazines, and then procure the right items by defeating the right enemies for a junk shop to make the actual weapon with. For the gun-toting character Irvine, you could unlock a GF ability to convert items into different kinds of ammo that he'd use in his limit break. And for the Blue Mage Quistis, you'd acquire new special abilities from giving her special items recovered from monsters. FF8 did a lot more integrating with pre-rendered and real-time, while employing a darker, more cinematic aesthetic than FF7. The game also featured a completely optional but very addictive card minigame, with different rules depending on the region, and secret opponents with rare cards dispersed throughout the game world. The sense of being home that you get from Balam Garden as your sort of activity hub early on was also unique and ahead of its time, as you moved from attending a school dance to eventually getting to plan one yourself. The characters felt like they were really growing up in this game while you played it, something many RPGs of its era tried for but few nailed so convincingly. It may not be everyone's favorite, but FF8 deserves a little more attention, in my opinion, than it gets. So check it out if you like PS1 games and a high-stakes, bizarre melding together of sci-fi and fantasy. After all, if there is one thing FF as a series teaches us, aren't they one and the same? Until next time, boss.